Is this on? Okay. Hello again, everyone. Good morning. Hello. My name is Mark, and I am a Pluto in Virgo. I feel better now. Yeah. Yeah, you can. Well, certainly. Yeah, why not? Put your hands up or stand if you want to. Yeah. Hey, there's a few of us. Yeah. Well, we're here to share about that today. Initially, I'd like us to set up technically what we might mean by Pluto in Virgo, what might be involved archetypically. And to do this, I'm going to use a natural zodiac. By the natural zodiac, I mean a zodiac in which the ascendant starts with Aries, second house Taurus, the archetypal blueprint of the chart. Now, if we place Pluto in its natural house, we form an inconjunct to the ascendant, a 150-degree aspect. I don't know if you folks have either done the school or Kim Marie's excellent workshop and talks on phases. The inconjunct is an archetype naturally of crisis. I'm going to talk about this a little bit and why. This is innate to Pluto now. Pluto in any house or sign, regardless, is in the natural zodiac, making that kind of imprint to the initial point, the Aries point. And here we see the anxiety of separation, if you like. The anxiety of being born as an instinctive, separate entity, as compared to the inclusion of our deepest soul, our deepest desires. So some level of crisis is intrinsic in Pluto, full stop. And sometimes this crisis can correspond to a classically Plutonian word, resistance. Pluto can correlate with resistance in any field. It can correlate with the need to explore taboos in any given field, to uncover that which has been repressed by others. But it can also correspond with our own innate resistance. Partly because, instinctually, moment by moment, of this potential struggle. Now, if we add, it should be Scorpio here. If we add Virgo to the natural zodiac, we see that it's doing something quite similar. Parallel, we might say. And we know straight away that as well as the intrinsic resistance or crisis implicit in the Pluto placement, we have an additional factor added. We're doubling up on the crisis front. In fact, Pluto in Virgo archetypally forms a yod in the natural zodiac. And every one of these people, on some level, just through the natal Pluto placement, is born in a yod. Oh my God. You know? So there is a sense potentially here that we're born in crisis. And we're getting this just technically to begin with. I'm going to try and explore how and why and what's the nature of that crisis, and maybe even, heaven forbid, how to resolve it. I'm not going to rush there, though. I'm still pretty hooked in on my own crisis, personally speaking. Yeah. So we know, we can understand this from a technical basis. We can see but it has validity structurally, and this is important to the Virgo consciousness. Yeah? Virgo as an archetype is mutable, and it's ruled by Mercury. It is also a yin archetype. Yin, mutable, Mercury. Yin, so it's internalized. Mutable, so it's changing all the time. And Mercury, so that there's a lot of thinking involved. So somewhere inside, you're changing all the time, and you're thinking very, very intensively about it, nearly all the time as well. We're looking at souls born with an intense inner self-analysis already in process. They're already in therapy. And they're in their diapers, yeah? It's an internal process. Why, we might ask? That's where I really want to go with this today, is why. We're going to keep coming back to the hows as well, how this works. From the point of view of the precession of the equinoxes, you know, people talk about us transitioning to an age of Aquarius. You know, that we've been in this age of Pisces so long. People say things like that. Technically, they're talking about the movement of the equinox in the sky, the transition slowly of the circumference of the zodiac over many, many hundreds, many thousands of years. It shifts. In this archetypal picture, the age of Pisces originated essentially with Christ, with the 0 BC point, BC AD point. And in Jeffrey's terms, every astrological age has a sub-age that kicks in halfway through, roughly halfway through. And these ages take roughly 2,400 years, roughly. So we're looking at about 1200 AD for the Virgo sub-age of the Pisces age. Yeah? We're coming out of the Dark Ages into the medieval period. We're looking at the buildings of the cathedrals, the dominance of Europe culturally, the dominance of Christianity within Western culture. This corresponds on one level to Virgo as an archetype. This is not the only level we're going to look at today, but it's a very crucial and critical one for the souls born in this innate yod that we've discovered. One of the reasons these souls are in crisis, and me myself included, is because of the last couple of thousand years of history. And particularly some of the institutions and developments in thinking that came to rise from that 1200 AD point onwards. In particular, the dominance of Christianity. We're going to have a pop at Christianity at some point today. I want it to be understood that this is a pop at all patriarchal monotheistic religions that hold certain principles to be true. And it is in no way a pop at Christ or the real nature of the teachings. Yeah, that's understood from the start. But what we are going to have a problem with is some of the messages put across in that name and the impact of them. That's really crucial to be understood at an early stage with the Virgo archetype. One of the messages, and Jeffrey has highlighted this beautifully in his books, in particular Pluto 2, is the Garden of Eden myth. That somehow the fall of man was originated by woman, and by her desire to learn new experiences, by her relationship to this snake figure. And increasingly then we have the development that the fall originated through the feminine principle. And therefore things related to the feminine principle that cannot be controlled or subordinated become originators of a new fall, yeah? Potentially the male priest could trip up, the man in the street could trip up. So we gain this increasing message through this Christian period that sex, emotions, the body, childbirth, the role of women in any form of religious or cultural life can be problematic, can be intrinsically problematic. The collective effect of this, by the way, the long-term effect of this is like profoundly damaging. A number of people with pronounced Pluto in Virgo signatures or Virgo Pisces nodes that might come to see you in your astrological counseling practice, or you might be friends with, that you could reach with these messages is quite important. Because a number of these people are carrying unresolved prior life trauma directly because of these causes. I remember, just as a brief example, I'll come to you in a second.
Also say the same as for the nodal axis in the 6th and 12th?
Yes. Yes, I would. Yeah, these are general laws to all Virgo Pisces ways of manifesting in a chart. For example, a client of mine came who had Pluto in Leo, but a first house Virgo South node. Mercury was in Taurus in the 9th. This person, very sincere desire to learn. Now remember, in 12th century, 14th century Europe, the one place you were going to get a decent education and actually have library books that were copied out was in a monastery. And a lot of very sincere souls found themselves in these places, trying to discover. And she, in fact, had been a scribe. Mercury retrograde in Taurus in the 9th, taking the physical pleasure to write out each word. I said that to her. And she said, goodness gracious me, when I was a child in my Catholic primary school, at the ages of 8 and 9, I used to spend hours drawing one big letter on a page in a book, as colourfully as I could. And then I would just put squiggles for the whole rest of the exercise book and put it down. Just a literal reenactment. But what happens when each day a sincere soul like that copies out books that have messages? And you're carefully lettering these things that say, actually, through our sexual desires, or if we're a woman and we feel a certain way, we could start to develop an intrinsic relationship with evil. We could start to become intrinsically evil. Or we could be responsible for the fall of man, the temptation of the priest. We could be implicit in the damage given to the Christ nature in the world. Terrible sense of inner alienation can result from this, because the person going to that place is sincere. They want to learn. They want to learn about what's going on in the world. They want to learn about truth. And as they're learning about truth and the truth of Christ's vision and reality, which are not in question here, they gain a new set of truths about themselves, that they're no good. Culturally, the dominance of this religion, politically its dominance, culturally its dominance, has seen this message repeated time and time again. And some of these souls will have had lifetime after lifetime of repeat messages. And all of it, almost all of it, most of the time, is what Jeffrey calls a form of injected guilt. They didn't actually do anything at all wrong. It is simply the cultural distortion of their own true nature. Think of it like a big bloodied syringe of some hideous drug. I mean, it's really just being pumped in. It's just going in, time and time again. And actually we can see this again. Technically, we can validate this for ourselves. Jeffrey said in the excellent video last night, The Psychodynamics of the Moon, keep coming back to the natural triads in the archetypal chart. Keep coming back to the squares made in the archetypal chart. Well, in the archetypal chart, Virgo becomes part of the Earth triad, doesn't it? We can add 2nd house Taurus and 10th house Capricorn. Capricorn can correspond, this is not the whole of this archetype, can correspond to dysfunctional societies or cultures. It can correspond to patriarchal distortion. Kristen brought up in her talk on Lilith very, very passionately and eloquently the impact of patriarchal distortion on the feminine principle. We're looking at an aspect of that here, inherently in the Pluto in Virgo condition. Actually, the seeds of some of this distortion lie in a multiple number of levels, but one of the levels is an ideological distortion. It comes in part also from the square from Sagittarius to Virgo, but I'll come back to that. We get to this point in 12th century AD, or throughout the kind of appropriation of Christ's message into our culture, where it somehow becomes noble or a sign of your love for the Creator to sacrifice your survival needs, your bodily needs, your sensual needs. And you get these terrible massacres, or as an example, there was a place, Masada, I believe, the Israeli place, where people collectively committed suicide so that they couldn't have their religion taken away. And then in similar signatures you have both the idea of being killed for your beliefs and also killing yourself. The survival instinct, Taurus, was stepped over in a natural, law-based spirituality. The survival of the species, the survival of the body and the emotional reality is a central part of the experience. As Mark was talking, when we hit the heart, when we hit our emotional reality, we belong to the earth. In a patriarchal, monotheistic distortion of spirituality, the earth is transcended and seen as lesser and ignoble. Animals are distorted and placed on cathedrals as gargoyles. The animal nature becomes split. Evolutionary astrology comes from a Sagittarian principle, the centaur. Man and animal combined. The patriarchal, monotheistic distortion of religion comes with not just the separation of man or woman from the body and from the earth, but the turning round and the judging of that separation. It's not just that we separated, but we're going to turn around and punish anyone else who will not also separate. That's the real key. We sent people all around the world, to tribal villages, to parts of the Amazon, to tell them how to live their life.
By we, do you mean the English or Christians?
I mean the cultures of Western Europe that were predominantly Christian. England, France, Spain, Germany, Portugal. These are empires that spread out 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries in an attempt to bring a message to the globe, essentially in a Capricornian fashion, a distorted, dysfunctional fashion. Arrive, subjugate. Arrive, experience a different way of life, fail to appreciate it totally, and try and rigidly and forcefully enforce one's own way of life. That's a Capricorn archetype.
Missionary.
But also for the quest of gold.
Absolutely. There are all sorts of distortions, yeah. Christianity became a cultural edifice as well as just a religious one. Many Pluto in Virgo souls will be in crisis in some way around this message. There is an also almost hallucinatory or persecutory element to it, actually. In fact, maybe this is a time for an example chart. See if I can work this thing. Did it right. This is a client of mine. Am I standing in the way there? Is it in focus?
No.
Okay. Will someone tell me when it is? Is that good? Great. Now let's check out the Virgo emphasis here. I think we can safely assume that there's quite a bit of it. Pluto in Virgo in the 4th house. South node is in Virgo, with the planet Mars conjunct that south node. And the ruler of the south node is also in Virgo, conjunct the Pluto. The entire evolutionary axis comes from this Virgo dimension. All of it, the whole thing. Now, this is a young man that was referred to me after his psychiatrist fell asleep on him. Fell asleep. his psychiatrist that charged him roughly twice what I'm charging him, who fell asleep on him after 8 sessions. This is also a man who has been sectioned in psychiatric institutions 3 times in his life and has had 10 breakdowns. Because where has this fracturing taken place but in the 4th house? In the dimension of the ego, in the lens that Jeffrey was talking about last night. Now, I want to talk about a number of things here. Someone has asked me in a previous question, I think maybe yesterday, about the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, which of course can take place in Virgo, but also still on a wide level when Uranus has moved into Libra. Intrinsically, we're looking at a trauma signature, simply in the Pluto placement alone with that signature. Inherently, everything that we're going to find through Pluto is already a trauma signature. In this case, we see family messages corresponding to the past experiences of this Virgo crisis. In a very brief way, this man, when he was very young, witnessed his father threaten his mother with a knife, was, thrown around a bit himself. When he announced to his family that he was gay, he was told not to go and visit his cousins, the younger children, in case being gay meant you were a paedophile. And then when those Catholic family, when those uncles were informed, also had a long lecture received on how he had now entered a zone where he was intrinsically evil. And he turns to me and he says, and people were surprised I had a breakdown later on. Because he felt it here. Because he's a very open-hearted guy. And he's not an undeveloped soul either. In fact, he's very open and very psychic. Quite disturbingly so in our last session together, just before I came here, when he started reading me. Which I'm not even going to tell you about. Sorry. So, we see here, with a situation like this, repeat lifetimes. Repeat lifetimes, many, many. Mercury retrograde, ruling the South Node. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Messages received that go in, that attempt to annihilate any sense of self-stability that you have. Not just that you're not good enough, it's not as simple as that. It layers so that any sense of security you have in your own volition becomes undermined.
He also has Uranus conjunct that huge black hole to Libra, which can really amp up traumatic change to the degree.
Sure. Well, certainly this guy blows up because he's manic. He's manic depressive, but he's unipolar. Manic depression is usually a bipolar condition. There is a manic phase and there is a depressive phase. He is only manic. He just flies. He says he enjoyed 8 of his 10 breakdowns. Because he just got to run around and dance and say whatever he liked to people. Yeah? We're often told about a sense of lack, aren't we? A sense of not good enough with Virgo. But there's a subtle difference between sense of lack and not good enough and intrinsically evil, isn't there? That's quite a step, actually. Yeah? That's quite a message to receive. So whether we're interested in our Luciferic stuff or not, it's also important to remember that there may be injected guilts that are nothing to do with any external agency or real temptation at all. Let's be absolutely clear. They are simply accumulated messages on an inner level. This corresponds with a core aloneness in the Pluto in Virgo archetype.
This injected guilt, is that like it's been projected onto them?
Yes, yes, lifetime after lifetime through messages, reinforced through family, religion. I think it's particularly cruel sometimes when very sincere people, you see in the chart they're very sincere, they've wanted to seek and find out truth, have ended up in these places and received the message because they're so open to wanting something real. And there is something real in Christianity. But it is more damaging to distort something real than to distort something that meant nothing at all. We might come back to this chart in a minute, we'll see. Any questions so far? Any questions at this point? Great. Now, I want to get a bit technical again. Whilst Pluto was in Virgo, for the duration it was in Virgo, Uranus was in Leo, then it moved to Virgo, and then it went into Libra. And this is this conjunction point we talked about. Interestingly, by the way, as an aside, anyone who does have it close or near conjunction, through solar arc, just count the number of degrees. You know, if it's 10 degrees before or 10 degrees after, those two planets will have met through solar arc when you were 10 years old. In my case, my Pluto is 29 Virgo, my Uranus is 13 Libra. 14 at puberty, when my main crisis should have just been that all the pretty girls went out with the sports guys, not the geeks, was actually something really a lot more coming through. And that's when a fundamental alienation began for me that lasted for quite a few years afterwards. And I did my walking around in black and smoking too much dope and reading Sartre and just feeling like I was expelled, you know? I felt sick, hence Nausea, one of my favorite books. Yeah. Yeah, wow. Just comes back and you make that decision. Converted to Catholicism at 10 years old. I'm thinking linked to that solar arc. Yeah.
Do you see any of the learning disabilities, the ADHD and the dyslexia issues coming up in this group?
Yes. Yes, it can do. And look in that example there with the Mercury retrograde ruling the South Node. There is limited capacity to take on anything new because the message is accrued so often and so long. You just can't take any more. And there's no room to take in anything else until it's resolved. And this can be that sense of just build-up that needs resolving is something that can come with the retrograde archetype generally. Any other questions?
So you give it about a 10 degree.
With that solar arc thing, well, on the conjunction level, I would take up to, I mean, mine's at 29 and my Uranus is 13, so that's 14 degree, and sometimes I think I have a conjunction, you know, so I'd be very wide with the idea of a conjunction. But the solar arc is just very simple. The number of degrees separating them, boom, that's the age.
In the chart, do they both appear in the same house?
Yes, the ninth.
And that would be a good reason to consider them in conjunction.
Absolutely, it supports it, doesn't it? Even though they're in different signs.
Well, isn't Pluto like the higher octave of Mercury, and then with conjunct Uranus, wouldn't that be like a learning disability signature, like with Mercury?
I don't see Pluto as a higher octave of Mercury, although when it's in Virgo, obviously it has a relationship to Mercury, yes. And when Uranus is in Virgo too. But I would take each individual chart. I can't propose at this stage a general rule about something like ADHD. There is some very interesting work on that by, what's his name, Thomas, I remember it, Tom Hartman, his name is. He wrote a book called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, which is about the way we're bleeding the oil and the resources that the sun has converted over billions of years. But he does some very interesting work on his website about ADHD. It's very, very helpful. I'd refer you to someone who knows what they're talking about rather than me. What was I going to say?
How do you feel about the idea that perhaps Mercury doesn't rule Virgo, but it's the shattered feminine archetype that's embodied in the asteroid that rules Virgo?
Two answers to that. On a technical level, what I love about evolutionary astrology is it works in a very, very deep way, only using the traditional rulers. And that's just brilliant for me. How great is that? Do I think that Virgo really has a relationship to the redemption of the repressed feminine? Absolutely. Absolutely, this is key. And this is key to the resolution here. One of the ideas for this talk, I called it in my head, Death and the Maiden. You know? Pluto, Death, Virgo. Another great image is that Marianne Woodman title of the book, The Pregnant Virgin. Pluto has penetrated and impregnated Virgo. That's a very useful and interesting book. Well, because you see, in far memory, behind Christianity there was still a Virgo. Yeah? You know, if you stretch right back, there was a Virgo age. 10,000, whatever, 12, 15, 14,000 years ago, whatever it was. This is just the distortion in this time field, in this place. In fact, Virgo has a correspondence to goddess cultures. I feel there's a link between, you know, the New Zealand Aborigines, the Polynesian islands, that type of feeling of dream time coming into the landscape and the earth. I think Virgo has a home there. These are people who are not ruled by what happened to them. Many Pluto and Virgo souls will remember another part of their consciousness. These can be some of the most sincere and dedicated people who have been coming back time and time again to try and do good. That's often why they ended up in those monasteries in that time-place thing. That's why they were there, trying to learn more. But it's central that they learn to live with that distortion, that it become processed, that it change. I mean, the key to beginning that change is the Pisces polarity. Recently, a friend of mine had a reading by Jeff, and I was listening to this reading with him, and we were talking about realities from space and the Pleiades and various things, and maybe helpful beings that are in this universe that might look down on us. And I went back on the train to my house, and I was sneaking out the backyard because I sometimes smoke. My girlfriend doesn't like it. And so I sneaked one in the backyard. And I was stood there and I was looking up at the stars, and I saw the Pleiades, and I waved. It's more confession time. I waved in that kind of like, yeah. No, it was just a Marlboro Light. I waved at the Pleiades in this kind of like, I hope you can see, I hope you take part, you know. And then I took another drag of my cigarette, and I stared down at my feet, and I was like deflated. I was like, I'm this insignificant little guy in this back of this terraced house in Bristol. What the fuck's that? You know, I couldn't believe it. And I was staring at my feet, and I felt so deflated. And then I thought, oh, come on, chin up, Mark, really, try here. And I stared back up, and no joke, an enormous shooting star just blazed across half the sky. Half the sky. Yeah. Yeah. That's only the second shooting star I've ever seen in that sky for the 3 years I've lived there. And it came 20 seconds after the wave, just as I managed to look up. I felt then in that moment like I was Pluto and Virgo being touched by Pisces. The sky was waving back, like in the painting in the Sistine Chapel, you know, the finger was coming back. Like E.T. Yeah. I think it glows in the Sistine Chapel on some nights. Be good.
Pleiades, they form a trine to your Pluto, don't
Do they? Where are they? What
they?
position?
Taurus.
Well, they would they would form a trine to some things. It's not actually with my Pluto, but that would be my IC, and I was in my backyard, kind of. Yeah, interesting. Okay, where was I? Pisces, the potential for forgiveness here, the potential to put this story down. It's essential for these souls to put this story down. And that's complicated. To recap, a mutable, Mercury-ruled yin archetype. Internal self-analysis. Internal yin, mental Mercury, analysis, Pluto. Lots of questions about lots of things. They're struggling to find the why inside, why it happened. First of all, specific counseling around exactly why it did happen for that individual person is obviously very helpful in creating some space to liberate. Because these people have issues. It's like we come here and we want to do some good again. You know, Jeffrey says right work's a big concern. You know, these are people who don't want to just stand out at the front and shine for the sake of it and have all the accolades thrown at them. They want to take part in something. They want to make it happen. I've often thought personally, Jeffrey, Pluto, Leo, Saturn, Leo, 9th, taught the school. Pluto, Virgo, 9th, I spent ages trying to study hard to catch up with the homework. And now I try and do it. I try and show people the method of it. I'm not the visionary. Pluto, Leo, that dreamt it. I mean, hats off, hats off. Respect. I just do my best, in my humble way, to teach it well, to get that Mercury, to get that inner self-analysis, to get ways of opening it up. But these people are going to find problems finding that work. Problems being able to kind of come out to the extent that this trauma remains unresolved. Yeah.
And what about the Virgo North Node?
Are you talking from personal experience? I'm asked about a Virgo North Node. In Virgo. And in a Pluto and North Node conjunct in Virgo, there's a desire to continue recent prior life development. This is always true with Pluto and the North Node in conjunction.
Say that again?
With Pluto and North Node in conjunction in any chart, in any sign, in any way, there is a desire to continue recent prior life development. There is no polarity point of Pluto in that case. In the evolutionary system, in the planetary method of chart interpretation, there's no polarity point. Pluto simply wants to continue working through the North Node. I don't know your individual chart well enough, but the general principle there might be something like that intensive analysis is actually intended to understand why the lostness in the past. As Pisces, as Maurice was suggesting in the difficult aspect of some of that coming out into the world with Neptune, we can feel very lost, we can be very isolated. We can also be caught in a dream that can be nightmarish unless it's understood. I mean, this is being triggered enormously by this Uranus coming into Pisces now. And it's beginning to touch the polarity points of these early degree Pluto and Virgos. Anyone in that condition, anyone, wait for it. This is a potential sign of enormous liberation. There is enormous potential here to begin the release from that past. There's nothing more sincere, Pisces, there's nothing more sincere than love and forgiveness, Pisces. That's a Pisces truth. Nothing will get you further, nothing will develop you more. You could go to all the empowerments, you could travel India for however many years, you could read however many books. Nothing's more important than sincere forgiveness, sincere love. Particularly when we know what happened to us, when we begin to remember, when we begin to understand the impact it had on us. All sorts of other conditioning issues for the Pluto in Virgo soul can originate there. I have very heavy conditioning in my chart. I have a Moon, Venus, Capricorn, a Saturn skip step. My parents were very, particularly my mum was very, controlling sometimes. That was her way. She wasn't a bad person, I even think looking at her chart with her South Node in Pisces, her Neptune conjunct the Sun in the 12th, her Pluto in the 11th, that she's had her own alienation issues through these experiences, But until I knew that, it's harder to understand and forgive, isn't it? Some of these people that may have just held us down are some of the very people we shared these original imprint experiences with. We'll start to remember that as Uranus crosses through Pisces. The potential to remember that and therefore forgive them arises. Yes?
Just an observation. I wonder if you had any reflections on it. When I think of this, my personal experience is that, like your shooting star story is a great example. When I come across something that is beautiful, my instinctual reaction is sadness.
Yeah.
That there's tears rather than joy, and I think that's part of that Virgo woman.
I agree. I mean, with my Moon, Venus and Capricorn too, and the Saturn skip step, there's a grief here, I think. I mean, I think it's this, my Pluto in Virgo, last degree Pluto in Virgo sometimes, I have this feeling in life like I've just been walking along with my sword and I've been trying to follow like some holy knight my way. I'm Mars in the 12th. I'm trying to fight for the larger cause, as Maurice would have put it. And that was Christ, I know that was Christ. And sometimes I feel I'm walking along and I've got this sword and I'm like, I'll fight for justice, for the love. And I get to this point and I'm just going along like this, staggering with this sword. And I put it down in the ground like some inverted cross or something, it sticks out. And I go down on my knees and I just sob. That has frequently happened to me in my life. You just reach a point where it's overwhelming. So much complex emotion bound up with the love you originally had. So much aloneness. So many times you just had to walk it and you just got the shit back. And it's amazing, it's overwhelming. And it's incredibly liberating if you can stay with it. Because, I don't mind saying, a half an hour of snotty dribbling before my sword in that inverted cross on the ground, and I can get up again, Yeah.
That's a recipe, right?
I mean, I watched a program on the Holocaust recently, a couple of programs on the Holocaust, and again, that's the kind of thing, the way it can hit you. And you're just sobbing for the how can it, because it resonates inside with something, with all the time something happened to you. Why? How can that be? You just can't believe it. So I can identify with that. I think it's the answer, yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the flavor of each of the Uranus issues from the Pluto?
Absolutely. I think with Uranus and Virgo alongside it, the persecutory element is intensified. Yeah. With Pluto and Uranus in Virgo, the persecutory element is emphasized.
Because the South Node was also.
Virgo, another level of Virgo here is persecution in a chart. And this does not have to come through the archetypes I've been talking about. But there can be issues around persecution. And indeed, back to Pisces, enslavement. Pluto-Uranus conjunct in Virgo, particularly conjunct. It's inherently a trauma signature. To the extent that this person's begun to individuate, they will have been persecuted for it. The consensus can have a grip. It doesn't always like to let people go out of the trance. We create trances. The Pisces part of the Virgo, it's you. We create dreams, hallucinatory structures. TV. Families have mottos, We don't cry in our family, we it's chin up here. Or we don't talk about Uncle Albert who was a puff, we don't, whatever. Yeah? There's a trance, there's a dream that there's one way of doing it. And then culture creates these dreams too. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about why is it different being persecuted with Uranus and Pluto in Virgo rather than in Leo or
Okay,
Libra?
sure. If I can. I mean, it's unique to every chart. That's why I don't want to draw too many general rules just from these. Sometimes with Uranus in Leo and Pluto in Virgo, there will have been memories of actually having had the power, and then the loss of it. This is not the same with Pluto and Uranus in Virgo. There are memories of having had the power, of being higher up, of being able to be empowered and control it. With Pluto and Uranus in Virgo, the flip has already happened. The pyramid's already inverted. The potential, therefore, for Pluto and Uranus in Virgo becomes the pathology of masochism. This is always a potential with Virgo Pisces anyway. But it can become intensely pathological with Pluto and Uranus in Virgo. And it can become collective. The Pluto and Virgo generation grew up around the Cold War, the reality of the bomb. We have the translation of the idealism of the late 60s, the kind of hippie revolution. We threw flowers at the guns, but there are still guns. The Pluto in Virgo inherited that. And behind the guns is a bomb that could destroy the whole world. So you get punk. You get punk instead of prog rock. Now prog rock's great, but these kids out on the estates and in the various places in the poor of the world and the Johnny Rottens of the world in their shitty little suburb of London say, screw all these people that spend years playing with expensive instruments, and boom, anger is an energy. The archetype of rebellion is intensified. Culture has not provided answers, it's just provided a false dream. And behind all our dream of happiness and success with our nice big house and the land of the free lurks, A-bomb testing in the Mojave Desert or whatever. With Uranus in Libra, I guess my feeling is with Uranus in Libra and the Pluto and Virgo generation, there can often be a tendency for the initial imprint of classical cultures, the Roman and Greek times, to have been the source of some of the trauma. And therefore you're looking sometimes at early Christianity. And some of these people, some of the people now transiting with Uranus transiting in Pisces, hitting the Pluto in Virgo, will remember their connection to the very early days of Christianity and its message. Some people will remember an affinity with Christ himself. The suppression of the feminine in those cultures was rife even before Christianity. I'm not blaming Christianity for patriarchy. It was there beforehand. In Roman and Greek cultures, in classical cultures, a woman had two basic choices when she grew up. Marry and become a non-entity who has no political or cultural power, no right to an education, and is sometimes literally physically shut away. Or try and strike out on her own, usually only possible if the decision to become a courtesan or some kind of free, independent woman in that context, supported to have an education, to learn maybe a musical instrument and how to read, but also how to please men and how to potentially please men that there is no natural attraction to whatsoever. So freedom is bought at the price of a lie. And the feminine is repressed again. Pluto corresponds to that which is repressed sometimes, that which is taboo. Virgo correlates to that which is inferior. Leo is superior. When we're in our leonine mood, we're the king. Our little Muhammad Ali moments in front of the mirror, I've had them, I don't mind saying it. when something went well. Virgo is the inferior function. Part of the role with Pluto in Virgo is to reveal what's repressed about inferior functions in ourselves, in life generally. This includes the feminine. This includes the existential anxiety and loneliness many of us feel in contemporary culture. These repressed elements can include the feminine, the body, sexuality. They can include the existential loneliness that many people feel in contemporary reality. It's an oft-quoted thing about London. You know, so many people say when they go in Britain, it's our biggest city, to London. And yet so many of them live each day on their own in the same large place. When there are supporting factors in a chart with Pluto in Virgo, then we will know that there can be severe sexual wounding in these placements. Sexual wounding. When in the rest of the chart supports from the original Pluto in Virgo, we're alert to a possibility through the Virgo archetype. Pluto sexualizes an archetype. Pluto does everything to an archetype. Yeah? When Pluto's there, it just tries to do everything to it.
Venus or Mars are involved in that?
Absolutely, or that they're involved with the evolutionary axis when we go to the south node and stuff. That Mars and Venus are in the 6th or 12th. With the Uranus in Leo generation, and this is sometimes true in Pluto in Leo people who have an emphasized Virgo Pisces archetype, we have a situation where sexuality, which is not a function that can be repressed, really, not successfully, it will emerge. In many monasteries and places, sex was going on. And obviously, pregnancy, children, Leo, are one of the ways that everybody gets to know about that. There's no avoiding it. You will often find loss of child signatures at times when, because that's when it became obvious that the nun was not keeping her vows. When these archetypes link, there can be a story around that. And often we're looking at souls that want to come back, that want to connect with that person again because they were torn away at birth. Because the birth itself was evidence of the fall, and therefore the fallen nature of the woman who birthed that evidence. The soul was granted no unique right to exist.
In a very Plutonian way, that evidence was buried.
Absolutely. Yes.
Quite literally.
Yes. Resisted to all intents and purposes, yeah, and destroyed.
They've actually found tunnels.
Yeah.
Remains.
Wow. This can come with the Uranus in Leo here, when it's linked with the Pluto in Virgo and other signatures to support it. It can also come with Pluto in Leo as a generation that have these signatures like Pluto's in Leo but it's in the 6th, or the nodes, or and we're looking when the ruler of the 5th house is implicated sometimes with these signatures in the evolutionary axis. And then sometimes the children that we have come back to us for these reasons. But imagine how shattering that is. You have a sexuality, you meet someone you love, you have sex with them. 8 months or so, or 7 months later, when your concealment plans haven't worked because there was no contraception, as well as being separated forcibly by the person you loved, you're potentially ejected from the whole place you've known as your home, or if you're not ejected from the life you have and you have no other life or no other means, you have your very child destroyed. It's hard to estimate. I don't want to get too heavy with this. I could get quite upset about it, you know? The number of times these things have happened over such a large period of our, we consider ourselves the greatest culture on earth, but our heritage is extraordinarily bloody and impersonal and damaging and damaged. Damaging and damaged, our heritage, yeah. So Pluto and Virgo souls are part of the cleanup operation. Yeah? We're here for the second wave. A lot of the Pluto and Leo generation came in with the big visions. They went off on their own. I very much respect the journeys to India, the traveling and the meeting of teachers. It's not happened to me. I've been lucky enough because of the pioneers of some of the true Pluto and Leo generation that some of those teachers have now come to where I live. And I've been able to follow them. And I'm allowed, therefore, to try and integrate into society now what their wisdom offers. I'm part of the cleanup operation, not the big solo story that I could write a novel about, my amazing experiences. No, just how can I use what's been gained from that to affect in society? And this is where the evolutionary stages come in, that I talked about yesterday with regard to the individuating condition in Uranus. In the early stages of the individuated condition, these people will just be fried, they will just be traumatized, they will be alienated on the edge of things. But the potential is to grow, is to use it to transform the prevailing culture and therefore not feel inherently inferior to the prevailing culture, not inherently on the outside of it. The prevailing culture needs these Pluto and Virgo people. It needs a whole sea of them, Pisces polarity, a whole sea. Any questions?
What about planets and Pisces opposing Pluto, like the moon or
Yeah.
Pluto houses?
Saturn.
And Huron.
Wow. Okay. There's so many ways of looking at that, basically. But I mean, one of my clients who had Pluto and Virgo opposite Saturn in Pisces, and that was across the first 7th axis. Pluto in Virgo, Saturn in Pisces, 1st, 7th. I mean, there are all sorts of other factors, but basically on that issue, she found herself attracted to a teacher type in her 20s that then became quite invasive and abusive. She's had real problems. Pluto in the 1st. Because it's an authority thing, isn't it? It's a patriarchal imprint sometimes, Saturn. Yeah. She's had real problems with those figures, and relationships for her have been a real problem. I'm not saying that's... Saturn is where we structure our consciousness. Yeah, exactly. But the absolute meaning of Pluto opposite Saturn in that context is to transform your own internal authority, Saturn, through forgiveness. Because otherwise there will always be this sense of inferior to that authority. Because there have been memories, been experiences time after time when an authority was held over on that level. Held over a person. Pluto opposite Saturn, the intense desire to transform one's own relationship to authority. Personal, internal and external. In this case through the reality of love. Yep.
Would you say something similar then for Jupiter would be to transform one's belief system? Absolutely.
Again, through love. And it would show an association when linked to trauma signatures, Pluto, Uranus, Virgo, whatever. You know, the opposite of that. Belief systems clouded by this message. People in authority who have not treated fairly because of the distortion of this message. What shows us the pain shows us how to go through it. It's very much a Pluto-Virgo thing. Yes?
Jeff already also talks about the Pluto-Virgo association being souls that come in from American Indian lives and that huge trauma of,
Yes.
of their, everything that their shamanic world was taken away.
Yes.
With it.
Yes. And we could link that through the square to Sagittarius, the indigenous cultures. Yes, Pluto and just Pluto and Virgo people have not only had these experiences just within the Christian paradigm. It's just because it's so common, it's a useful way to hook the messages. Go on, you're going to ask a question.
Are you familiar with Barbara Hand Clowes?
I am.
Well,
Yes.
She attributes the rulership of Virgo to Chiron.
Yes.
Chiron to Virgo. So.
Other than that, other than her doing that, I like everything that she does. And I think that's a truly wonderful book. Someone asked me about Chiron earlier and I just recommended it to them. I'm not an expert on Chiron. Barbara Han-Clow is, and her book, The Rainbow Bridge to the Outer Planets, is a very good book. And that's rare, actually.
So
Yeah.
why don't you?
I simply don't use Chiron in a rulership thing because I stay with the traditional format for simplicity and ease. Couple of last things, very briefly. Pluto in Virgo, these messages come, yeah? They just keep coming, sadly. I found in my life. It's step by step, like Jeffrey said in the tape last night. Step by step. Pluto Virgo is a mutable, yin, Mercury-ruled archetype. Specific techniques are required that through repetition you can internalize into your own consciousness. And that supports the forgiveness process. And that could be as simple as the right kind of walk, an exercise program, or a meditational program, or a specific therapeutic method. But Pluto in Virgo needs that method. Because without it, you don't have a structure, and without a structure, it's so easy to fall back into the feeling of it will never happen for me, because there's so much memory of it never having had, or of this message coming in. The key to the liberation of forgiveness through Pisces are specific methods of stilling the internal dialogue. Pluto in Virgo, intense chatter mentally. Something like, shit, why? Shit, freaking out, you know? Like that. Existential crisis land. I woke up at 4 this morning, jet lagged. I'm still on the wake up at 4 every morning rhythm. 30 seconds after waking up, in a lovely relaxed state, I was into a mini crisis about this talk. Just went off like a little supernova over here in my consciousness. And I had to just try and dampen it down with some space around it. Yeah? That can come on all so easily. Specific methods. Techniques, the things that work for you. I'm not going to prescribe something. It's a unique thing. It's an individual thing. But Pluto in Virgo is very, very supported by step-by-step methodologies. They create a structure for the consciousness to allow the opening and the forgiveness through Pisces. And that's all we have time for today, I think.